Welcome to another edition of our web-based Voice of Palestine, Voice of the Palestinian People. Our featured guest for this show is David Cronin, an Irish journalist and author who has written extensively on EU relations with Israel, including his recent book, Europe's Alliance with Israel, Aiding the Occupation. We will talk with David about EU complicity in Palestinian oppression and dispossession, and also his solidarity activities in attempting citizens' arrests of leading Israeli officials. Good evening, Dave, and welcome to the Voice of Palestine.
Good evening, Hanna. Thank you very much.
You know, let's start with Europe's relations with Israel historically. I guess it goes way back to the Balfour Declaration, doesn't it?
Well, yes, of course. I mean, Britain has to accept a huge amount of historical responsibility for everything that has happened in Palestine over the last century, really, if not longer. I mean, of course, if you go back to Arthur James Balfour's famous declaration of 1917, where he basically promised to set up a Jewish homeland in Palestine, that's at the root of the injustice in Palestine and indeed throughout the whole region, and you know.
Yeah.
The British and other European powers try to present themselves as honest brokers, really, in the Middle East. But the reality is that, you know, if you go back as far as you just said a moment ago, you go back as far as the Balfour Declaration. Since then, and they've always been. They have not been. They've not been neutral. They've not been impartial by any means. They've been very much on the side of the Zionist movement, and since the creation of the State of Israel, have been very much. The main European powers have been very much on the side of the State of Israel. Unfortunately, in my opinion, it's become worse in recent years. Particularly, I think since the September the 11th atrocities in 2001, the Israelis, I think, have played the whole geostrategic game arising from the so-called war on terror quite cleverly. And this, you know, and they have kind of presented their oppression of the Palestinian people as an indispensable part, almost, of the war on terror, the international war on terror that George Bush declared. Yeah. And unfortunately, the Europeans, rather than being critical of what the Israelis are doing, have become increasingly complicit in these crimes. Obviously, we can go into more details about this in a moment.
Yeah. You know, just to talk about the Balfour, you know, I mean, Britain promised Palestine to the Jews, quote unquote, although you know they didn't own Palestine. I mean, it's ridiculous to see the validity of such a promise. You know, the Balfour Declaration. Again, it shows you how really outrageous such an act. You know, and it's the optimum in arrogance and colonialism. Really, you know, you promise something you don't owe to other people who has no relation to the land. Do you think that you know, Britain specifically and Europe in general has a lot to rectify the injustice that happened to the Palestinian people?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think it's fundamentally a kind of a question of honesty, really. You know, you know, to have a just solution in Palestine, I think the British really need to own up to the fact that they have been a fundamental part of the problem. You know, you hit the nail on the head there, saying they promised they promised Palestine to design as a movement, even though they didn't own Palestine. Of course, you know, Britain had a vast empire and numerous countries that it didn't actually own, but it behaved as if it owned most of the world. Indeed, I understand that there's a new book out saying that there's only a handful of countries in the world that Britain has not invaded at some stage in its history. You know, so there is this huge arrogance and this huge kind of colonial legacy there, and you know that kind of mentality survives to this day. One vivid manifestation of it was in 2006 after the elections in Palestine, where the European Union and the United States, despite the fact that they sent observers to those elections, and despite the fact that those elections to the Palestinian Legislative Council were found to be free and fair elections, the European Union and the United States decided to ignore the results, or decided to boycott the administration that was formed. Simply because they did not like the outcome of the election. They did not like the fact that the party that they didn't trust, Hamas, emerged as the strongest party. You know, and so there's just this kind of. You know, they feel that they can almost handpick the representatives of the Palestinian people, and unfortunately, that is exactly what has happened. I mean, Salam Fayyad, the current Palestinian Authority Prime Minister, is somebody who's got no democratic mandates from his worth speaking of from his own people, but he's somebody who is a real darling for the West, you know, and you have to ask why is that the case? And the only kind of plausible explanation, or the only way you can come to a plausible explanation for why that is the case, is to perhaps examine his background. You know, he's a former official with the International Monetary Fund, and is somebody who's kind of been, for want of a better word, brainwashed in the somebody who's kind of has an almost slavish devotion to the kind of economic policies that are treated as almost sacrosanct by the United States and the European Union. So he's somebody who's regarded as a safe pair of hands by Britain and other European Union countries, you know. And as a result of that, you know, they feel that they have almost got this right to decide that he should be the representative of the Palestinian people, even though he's never been given that responsibility by his own people. He's not an elected prime minister. He's somebody who's been appointed. Yeah.
And you know, I read in one of your articles that this policy was designated really the International Fund, Monetary Fund, designated this policy for Africa. I read in one of your articles, and he's trying to implement it in Palestine. Is that correct?
Yes, and if you look at Salam Fayyad, one of the most important documents that he has signed in his current role as the Palestinian Authority's Prime Minister, is a document called "Towards a Palestinian State," and that makes it very clear that he is committed to neoliberal policies, to the policies of global capitalism. Effectively, he's been talking about having the private sector as the engine of the Palestinian economy. But very, very worryingly, there's an exception to there's an important caveat to this. He foresees quite major expenditure on security Or what's we have to ask. Of course, it's not. We're not really talking about security in the kind of from a holistic sense. What we're really talking about is controlling controlling the West Bank in effect in a way that Israel and Europe and the United States are comfortable with. So there's been huge efforts made in full cooperation with the European Union to build up a police force, an internal police force run by the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. And the European Union has even been running a special police mission in the West Bank called COPS, with two Ps, the Coordinating Office for Palestinian Police Support, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I guess this is part of General Dayton's mission.
Absolutely, yeah. It's the kind of the division of labour that was agreed upon was that the United States would be in charge of training for the effectively the military police or quasi-military police in the West Bank and Gaza originally, and that the European Union would be in charge of training for the civilian police. And that has continued. There's been quite major support from the European Union for the Palestinian Authority's police services, to the point of there's been quite outrageous infringements on human rights and civil liberties on the part of the Palestinian Authority's police forces. There's ample evidence that these guys have resorted to torture on a large scale of their own Palestinian citizens on a large scale, of people basically who don't agree with Fatah, the main ruling party in the West Bank. But the European Union has kept its mouth shut. The representatives of the European Union have kept their mouths shut about this torture. They haven't said one word basically about this torture, and actually worse than that, in many cases they've actually praised the conduct of the Palestinian Authority's police forces. Javier Solana, for example, is quite a well-respected elder statesman, basically, of the European Union. He was the head of, he was the European Union's foreign policy chief for about a decade, I think from 1999 to 2009. And he, at the time, just after Operation Cast Lead, Israel's attack on Gaza in late 2008 and early 2009, he praised the conduct of the Palestinian Authority's security forces, even though they violently suppressed demonstrations in the West Bank against Israel's murderous campaign of murderous offensive on Gaza. So the European Union is intimately connected to both Israel's occupation of Palestine and all the crimes that involves, and also to the crimes committed by the Palestinian Authority and by the quislings, basically, that are in charge of the Palestinian Authority.
I just like to note that there are more Canadian trainers for Dayton mission than Americans, just to connect it to Canada, and number-wise, I mean, there were more security forces training the security forces from the Canadian Security Intelligence Services than the Americans on the ground there. But having said that, obviously, to Palestinians and to Arabs and Muslims and the world in general, that all this mission is clearly to protect Israel and keep its occupation going. So in your book you say the European alliance with Israel is really aiding the occupation. Maybe it's aiding, but also it's making Europe complicit in these war crimes and ethnic cleansing and apartheid. Could you tell us a bit about your book and why you decided to write it?
Sure. Yeah, the reason why I decided to write it is actually quite a mundane reason. I mean, I'd spent some time in Israel and Palestine, back towards the beginning, towards 2001, that kind of time, and then I become increasingly. That was the first time I was in Israel and Palestine, and I'd become increasingly interested in the situation. And then but without really, I hadn't really kind of, despite living in Brussels and so on, I wasn't really. I was prepared. I guess maybe I was a little bit naive, and I was prepared to take the constant assurances given by the European Union about it being an honest broker in the Middle East at face value for a long time. I have to confess. But then that began to change, particularly when I attended a conference. I think it was in the year of 2007 here in Brussels, which gave a much more critical analysis of the relationship between the European Union and Israel, and that was the first time that it was really explained to me in clear and simple terms that the European Union has an extremely close relationship with Israel, to such an extent that Israel is almost a member state of the European Union. This is the first time that this was really spelled out to me, and after hearing this, I decided, somebody needs to look into this in a bit more depth, because I didn't think that anybody was really kind of aware of just how close this relationship was. I didn't feel there was proper public knowledge about the level of cooperation and the level of complicity between the European Union and Israel. So I really just decided to research it then, and I wrote the book mainly in the year 2009, which obviously was a very important year and a very disturbing year, because it kicked off with the appalling attack on Gaza. And I went to Gaza shortly after that attack, actually, and I was just totally. I'd been in the West Bank prior to that, but it was my first time in Gaza, and I was really shocked by just the level of destruction that I saw, and coming back to the complicity between the European Union and Israel, I was even more, perhaps even more shocked what was more shocking than just the scale of the destruction that I saw was to realize that our governments here in Europe supported that destruction. When it was actually happening in early 2009, a whole gang of numerous senior European Union leaders found time in their busy schedules to go en masse to Jerusalem and to spend time wining and dining with Ehud Olmert, who was the Israeli Prime Minister at the time, and they made a very public gesture of solidarity, not with the people who were actually being attacked, but with the people who were committing the attack. In other words, the Israeli state.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I began to during the course of my research, particularly in 2009, I realized that the European Union was providing subsidies to some of the armaments companies that had provided the drones and other weapons that were used to attack Gaza. And this was extremely shocking for me. I'm talking in particular about the scientific research cooperation between the European Union and Israel, which is actually probably the most important aspect in economic terms, perhaps with the exception of the overall trading relationship between the two sides. But in terms of the actual the kind of cooperation that's coordinated by the European Union with Israel, probably the most important example of this in concrete terms and in financial terms is in the field of scientific research. Yeah. And what's particularly disturbing is that companies like Elbit and Israel Aerospace Industries, the very companies that supplied the weapons that have been used and are being used to attack and kill innocent Palestinians, are benefiting lavishly from European Union scientific research grants. Yeah. At the moment, Israel is involved in a total of about 800 scientific research projects coordinated by the European Union, and these have a total value of in excess of 4 billion euros.
And these research things are basically in the military research, isn't it? Or they are all sorts of research, including the military. Do you know?
Yes, I do. You've touched on something that's very important there, actually. Officially, the European Commission, the European Union's executive, says that it only finances civilian research. Mm-hmm. Yet what has happened over the past decade is that there has been a new program devised for so-called security research. Mm-hmm. And this was presented as a response to the September the 11th atrocities and to bombings that occurred in Madrid and London in I think the years 2003 and 2005. Mm-hmm. And the official kind of narrative. The official narrative is that the security research involved is of a civilian nature. That it's not of a military nature. Yes. Mm. Many of the recipients of the subsidies that are handed out under the framework of the as part of the EU's security research program are hardcore military companies, hardcore weapons producers, including many Israeli companies. Israel is the largest non-European, the most active non-European participant in the EU's scientific research program.
And usually, most of these research has dual applications. I mean, nobody could tell the military not to use any findings of such research. But you mentioned also in one of your articles I read that some of this money goes to the settlement, which again shows the hypocrisy of the European Union. By they condemn and denounce the settlement, at the same time they send funds for research that take place in these legal settlements that that built on stolen Palestinian land. Am I correct in, because I think I read that in one of your articles.
Yes, you're absolutely correct. Ahava, the cosmetics company, is involved in European Union financed scientific research projects, particularly in the field of nanotechnology. Ahava is based. Ahava has its main production facility in the illegal settlement of Mitzpeh Shalem in the West Bank. That's also where the company's visitor center is located. Yes, officially the European Union says it does not give money and it does not approve of any cooperation with companies that are based in the Israeli settlements. So what appears to have happened in this case is that Ahava has simply given its address, hasn't been honest basically about where exactly it is located, and in any of its correspondence with the European Union, it has put down an address for one of its offices inside Israel's internationally recognized borders, rather than admitting that it's really headquartered in an Israeli settlement. The Mordechai Quinn, the current European Union Commissioner in charge of scientific research, has promised to address these kind of issues, has promised to address the question of European Union subsidies for companies based in or active in settlements, as part of preparations for the next European Union scientific research program, which I think will kick off in the year 2014. Yes, what's equally troubling, of course it's welcome that she has said that she's going to address this issue. What's equally troubling, however, is that some of these companies that are taking money from the European Union have supplied surveillance equipment for the illegal wall that Israel has built in the West Bank. Again, these companies include Elbit and Israel Aerospace companies. Israel Aerospace Industries. Two of the largest Israeli armaments companies. The Norwegian government, Norway, of course, is outside the European Union, and possibly for that reason has had a bit more freedom to take robust action against Israel. Norway has, to its credit, decided to declare some of these companies ineligible for participation in its state pension scheme because of their involvement in the construction of the wall in the West Bank. Yet the European Union doesn't seem to have any problem with handing over some of my money and the money of other European taxpayers to the very same companies, despite the fact that wall was declared illegal by the International Court of Justice in the year 2004.
And
this is absolutely scandalous,
and it's worth noting that 85% of this wall is built on Palestinian land. It wasn't on the border of 48 borders. No, it
encroaches. It goes deep into the West Bank. If you go to Bethlehem, for example, it goes right into the center of Bethlehem.
So it is really, hypocrisy and double talk. Also, you pointed out in some of your articles about the hypocrisy about Iran and Israel. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Sure. The obvious point that I think needs to be spelled out time and time again is that Israel is a much bigger threat to world peace than Iran is. Israel already has nuclear weapons, unlike Iran. Israel has refused to sign the nuclear non-proliferation treaty, whereas Iran has signed up to the non-proliferation treaty and has agreed to have. Israel won't allow any inspections of its nuclear facilities, whereas Iran has allowed some inspection of its nuclear facilities. The level of hypocrisy here is astounding. It was Israel. Let's not forget that it was Israel that introduced nuclear weapons to the Middle East, not Iran. Yet it's Iran that is effectively subject to what is increasingly becoming an economic blockade.
Economic sanctions,
Absolutely. I mean, I picked up the International Herald Tribune there a couple of weeks ago, and there was 2 weekends ago, I think it was, and there was an article on its front page about how medicines are becoming some certain types of medicines are not being imported into Iran now as a result of the sanctions that the West has imposed on that country. We only have to look at what's happened in its neighbouring country, Iraq, to know how horrible something like that can become. I mean, something like 600,000 infants died. According to UNICEF, the United Nations Children's Fund, in Iraq because of the economic blockade that the West imposed on Iraq. This is extremely frightening. It's disgraceful that Iran is now being. I mean, I'm not. Don't get me wrong. I'm not an apologist for Iran or anything like that. I'm not a supporter of the Iranian government or anything like that. I'm sure you're not either. And there are major human rights abuses in Iran that every human being has a right to be concerned about. But what's happened, the way that Iran has been the way that Iran has been singled out is absolutely disgusting. And of course, the reason, I mean, this isn't something, of course, that has happened out of the blue. The reason why Iran is being punished in this way is because it's a country that is not controlled by the West. I mean, it's as simple as that. We know that back in it goes back to 1953, if not earlier, when the CIA effectively decided to depose a democratically elected government in Iran, simply because it didn't because Iran was not deferential enough to the West, and had its own ideas about perhaps that its own oil resources might support its own people. Obviously, that was anathema to the whole thinking of Britain and the United States, and and to the big oil companies. So it's sheer hypocrisy.
And
what's happening at the moment?
I think you really hit the nail on the head by saying that it is the oil, and it's the same in Libya. Again, we're not fans of Gaddafi. He did many atrocities, even against the Palestinian people. Nor the fans of Assad now. But the truth must be said that the West is meddling. The EU EU and North American regimes, Canada included, are meddling in other people's affairs. And basically, what happened in Libya, I read an article that you mentioned that it was really basically for the oil and for interest and not for human rights, because there is more atrocities now are committed against the Libyan people.
1 minute.
Than against the, during Gaddafi. It seems we really running out of time. So. What do you think of what I've said about Libya and the double standards, Dave, that the Europeans, and because specifically they really participated militarily directly in other countries' affairs?
Absolutely. This is the European Union was fully involved in the NATO attack on Libya. The only important exception, I guess, being Germany, which decided for its own reasons to stay out of the war. The other major European Union powers were fully behind the attack on Libya. Catherine Ashton, I noticed the current European Union Foreign Policy Chief made a statement, I think it was on the 23rd of October this year, where she congratulated the Libyan people for the first anniversary of the so-called Declaration of Liberation. Yet, just two days after she made her statement, the Russian television channel RT had a report from Bani Walid, Saudi Tripoli, which indicated that white phosphorus is being used by the Libyan forces in their attack on the old Gaddafi loyalists in Bani Walid. Now, obviously, this is something this was one report from one television channel, and any such report should be taken with a certain degree of caution and skepticism. Yes, it still is something that, in my view, requires investigation, because it has been documented by Human Rights Watch, and I think even by reporters with the New York Times, that there is red phosphorus in Libya, and that some of the forces in Libya have red phosphorus in their arsenal. Yes, this isn't. We have to bear in mind, if this is true, if this is true, the people that according to Catherine Ashton liberated Libya are now using horrible weapons against
civilians population.
Against civilian population, and in any event, even if it's not true, we know that Catherine Ashton's friends in Libya are committing atrocities. She has said almost nothing about this, to be honest. Okay, she said one or two things expressed concern, but she hasn't, she hasn't said anything forceful, and it's certainly nothing that would make these guys sit up and take notice. It's extremely depressing. When you see what is happening, and it's sure.
Yeah, I think it's clearly participation in a war crime, and they should be held responsible sooner or later, and I hope sooner, because what they're doing, not just to the Palestinian but all the other Arab peoples, whether in Bahrain or Yemen or Syria nowadays, really demands justice for the people of all these countries and the world in general, because they really support all these dictatorship in the name of security interest of Europe and the West in general. I'd like to. You said you visited Gaza after the attack on it in 2008, 2009. I guess you stated your impression was really devastating what's happened in Gaza, but the Israel used the new weapons there, and this relates to my next question, where you try to do a citizen's arrest for Yitzhak ben Israel. Could you tell us about this weapon they used and the role of Yitzhak ben Israel in it, and what happened when you tried to arrest him in Europe?
Yes. Yitzhak ben Israel is somebody who is very well respected in the Israeli political stroke military establishment. He's somebody who was a very senior. He was a senior weapons developer for the Israeli military, and he went on to become a member of the Knesset, the Israeli Parliament, for the Kadima party, the party of Zipi Livni and Ehud Olmert, the former Israeli Prime Minister and Foreign Ministers, respectively. Sorry, that should be the other way around, but you get what I'm saying. In any event, there has been there was an Italian television documentary a few years ago which presented evidence that Mr. Ben Israel had been involved in the development of a weapon called DIME, dense inert metal explosive, which is a weapon kind of similar to cluster bombs, in terms of the effect that it has on people. It basically slices the limbs off people. It's a very horrible weapon. And this weapon was basically tested out during Operation Katla, during the attack on Gaza in late 2008 and 2009. And I discovered last year, towards the end of last year, that Mr. Ben Israel was coming here to Brussels to speak at a European Union-sponsored conference on so-called, I think it was on the applications of, it was on the relationship between terrorism and technology and those kind of issues. And so I tried to, I asked for, I registered for this conference, and I went to the hotel where it was taking place. It was quite a low-key event. When I went to the conference, the people at the registration desk said they had no record of my registration, even though I'd sent them emails saying that I was interested in attending and everything. So they said, we're sorry, but you cannot attend. So I said, well, excuse me, I don't see why I cannot attend. So after about a minute, they said, well, if you don't leave now, these policemen behind you will deal with you. So I looked behind me, and there was two policemen there, and so I just said to them, are you, good morning, are you from the hotel's security? And they said, no, we are Belgian intelligence officers. So I happened to look around, and then I saw a face that I recognized, and it was Mr. Somebody that I recognized from a photograph that's just beside the registration desk, and it happens to be Mr. Ben Israel himself. So I just pointed out to him, and I said, that gentleman over there, his name is Mr. Ben Israel. And I said, Mr. Ben Israel, I am putting you under citizen's arrest because I believe that you have developed weapons with the express intention of them being used to kill and maim innocent Palestinian civilians. and I therefore believe that you should be arrested for crimes against humanity. And the two gentlemen behind me, the two members of the Israeli intelligence, just grabbed me and took me down the stairs. You know.
So they didn't really.
Sorry.
The Belgian police didn't really take you seriously. The same with the other.
Well, I thought it was incredible that this is quite a low-key conference. You know, there weren't any protests on it or anything like that. But I thought it was incredible that Belgian secret security guards were basically protecting a senior Israeli military official.
Yeah.
You know? I wasn't presenting any threat to the guy or anything like that. It was entirely a peaceful action, and there was no. He didn't seem to be under any threat from anybody else. So I just thought it was. I thought it was incredible that rather than actually kind of investigating somebody who in my mind, at least should be investigated for crimes against humanity. They instead decided to give me grief, for actually pointing this out.
Rather than the war criminal. You did... Exactly, yeah. And you did the same thing with Avigdor Lieberman on 2 occasions, I believe, and the same results, wasn't it?
Yes, I twice attempted to arrest Avigdor Lieberman for the crime of apartheid. On both occasions, I arrested him at a press conference that he was giving in Brussels, and I had a slightly unpleasant experience. Second time I tried to do that, I was in July of this year. Where I was taken away and handcuffed by security guards. So it wasn't maybe something like, I don't want to make too big a deal of it, but compared to what the Palestinians have to go through on a daily basis, it was a fairly what I had to put up with was a fairly minor.
We're running out of time, really, Dave. I refer our listeners, if they want to learn more about these citizens' arrests, they could go to the Electronic Intifada and search for your name, and you have quite few articles there about all those. But I'd like also to give you a chance to say where people, to tell us where people can get your book, Europe's Alliance with Israel Aiding the Occupation, and I'll give you a final word to our listeners how people can really counter the effect of this support of the European Union and US and Canadian government to Israeli ethnic cleansing and apartheid.
Sure, yeah. Well, to answer your first question, my book, the title of it again is Europe's Alliance with Israel Aiding the Occupation. It's published by Pluto Press, and it's available from their website, which is Pluto Books, Pluto books.com, I think. It's also available from Amazon and from many other outlets, both online and in bookstores. And to answer your second question, what can people do to support Palestine? Of course, there's a whole range of things that people can do, but I think probably the most important thing is to support the campaign for boycott, divestment, and sanctions against Israel, the BDS campaign. That means don't buy any Israeli goods. Educate yourself as much as possible about the situation in Palestine. If, for example, you're a student or a teacher in the university that is involved with cooperation programs with Israeli universities or Israeli private companies, find out about the companies that are involved and make sure to pick up a fuss with the authorities in your university. That's just one example of many things that can be done to
and like you said,
to advance the Palestine solidarity movement.
Yeah, and like you said, education is a very important tool. And if you're in doubt, I think the most effective way is to go see for yourself, like you did in 2001, right? I think that's the most effective tool of education and learning about the situation. And they don't go on an Israeli tour, though, yeah, because they don't.
Exactly. You know,
yeah. Okay.
Exactly. There are plenty of ways to see the West Bank, and it's difficult to get into Gaza, to be perfectly honest, for Palestine solidarity activists. But it is possible to visit the West Bank and in most cases, to make connections with Palestinian grassroots organisations in the West Bank, and to find out, to see for yourself exactly the reality of the situation.
Yeah, and we thank you really, Dave, for being with us, and keep up the good work. Keep giving them hell.
Thanks very much.
You see, and keep up.
Thank you very much, Hanna.
It was a pleasure talking to you. And,
thanks very much.
Keep up the citizens' arrest. I hope you will be successful one of these days. Yeah, have a good night. Thanks again. Yeah.
You too. Thanks very much. Take care.
Thank you.